So we are now commencing our session. Assalamu alaikum and a very warm welcome to all of you for the second session of Altered State of World Post COVID-19, Opportunities and Challenges. Coronavirus pandemic is proving to be the third major event in the last 3 decades that is inarguably shaping the global order. The first two being the end of Cold War and the event of 9/11. As of 1:30 p.m. Pakistan Standard Time, I was checking the statistics. 1.6 million people around the world are afflicted with this disease, and the calamity is worsening. Epidemiologists are envisioning an unprecedented loss of human lives due to adjustments in our way of living. Bear in mind that this crisis is not just confined to the national and international security architecture, but it has also altered the social, political, and economic paradigms. Uh, Despondency in these testing times would do us no good, and the research and policy community is in Pakistan need to respond to this novel challenge with a renewed optimism. Even though the pandemic was not anticipated, but it is surely not a black swan event. Nobel laureate Joshua Lederberg once said that the single biggest threat to humanity's continued dominance on this planet is the virus. The current situation demands from us to broaden up our horizon, calculate probable future scenarios, and develop effective modalities of our response mechanism. Responding to this call, the Center for Strategic and Contemporary Research has taken the lead in organizing online sessions that incorporate ideas and expertise of professionals coming from diverse academic backgrounds from all over Pakistan. The webinar series initiated by CSCR, titled Altered State of the World Post-COVID-19 Challenges and Opportunities, is a successful and first of its kind. Ladies and gentlemen, our honorable attendees and the panelists, the Center for Strategic and Contemporary Research is an independent policy institute based in Islamabad. Since its establishment in 2015, the center has sought to generate an academic foresight on issues of significance for civil society stakeholders, policymakers, and state officials. The center possesses a dynamic team of young professionals, uh, which leads and manages in-house analyses, commentary videos, policy briefs, monographs, in-house research, seminars, conferences, and most recently, webinars. I'd like to apologize for any last-minute changes in the schedule. Unfortunately, this virus has seriously impacted people from every sphere. And a very relevant example is the last-minute unavailability of some speakers who were supposed to be part of today's session. The second webinar today comprises of a cohort of young professionals from around the country who have examined the post-COVID-19 order from a different lens. The center has always encouraged fresh perspectives, and this particular session is an initiative in the same direction. Without further delay, I shall introduce our first speaker of today's webinar. We have Dr. Hussain Nadim with us. He's the CEO of Nerve Analytics, a data analytics come digital media firm. He previously worked in the government of Pakistan. Dr. Nadeem has a PhD from the University of Sydney, MPhil from Cambridge University and Bachelors from George Washington University in the United States. He specializes in international security and international development. For his work in the public sector, he was listed in the Forbes Magazine 30 under 30 list of 2016. I'm opening the session. I'm opening the floor now, Dr. Hussain Nadim. Over to you, sir, for your remarks.
Thank you, Tala, and to the other colleagues that are present over here and anybody who's in the audience. These are strange times and exceptional circumstances. So I would like to thank the CSCR who has arranged this very important subject actually on not just looking at the current status of Corona as most of us are doing, but also to look at the post-Corona world order I won't make a very long speech, but I would like to say a couple of things that are very important, and would like to also pose them as a question for us to think, because it is too soon right now, given the situation is fluid, to say anything with certainty. We don't have the complete data so far. We don't know exactly the current impact it is going to be on the big economies like the United States and European economies. And we don't know if this will bounce back all over again. So when the markets are closed, the economies are shut down, it is very hard to predict with complete certainty what the exact result will be. However, not to say that we cannot predict some of the things that are likely to happen. Uh, for one, in my humble opinion, the world has changed. And I cannot stress it enough that this is the second time in the last 20 years that the world has seen such a drastic change, as you rightly pointed out. 9/11, and anybody who remembers that, most of us do over here, changed the way the world operated. Now, that fundamental change was at both the structural level of how the government operated, the security protocols, the global architecture, but more so changed the mindset of the people. Uh, there is a term called biopolitics, and that biopolitics emerged where people became the threat. It was not the states anymore. For instance, back in the days in the Cold War, Soviet Union was the threat. China, the communism was the threat. But after 9/11, the recognition under the National Security Council strategy of US in 2001 was this particular line, which basically argued that in the new wars, the threat is actually being faced by sub-state actors, militant groups, and other individuals, ideological individuals, uh, who have the capacity to develop homemade bombs, for instance, even bioweapons like anthrax, and conduct operations that can delegitimize the American hegemony. This was further in 2005 and 6 under the DFID funded programs. This was also further deliberated under the Security Development Nexus, where the core argument was that it was not just the militant organizations, but also the diseases. And this is something that I'm talking about in 2005, where the first time this idea of how biochemical weapons and the diseases from the third world countries can also change the societies in the West. So essentially, under that framework, the idea emerged that it is not just that the West is secure anymore, like in the olden days of colonization, but what happens in the eastern states, in the southern states like Pakistan, India, and other poor countries, also directly impact the security and stability of the Western societies. So the world is kind of like more interlinked now, and that interlink basically meant that the West now has the right and authority to intervene when it sees necessary to change the situation on ground. And when we saw the wars happening in Iraq, Libya, and elsewhere, that was one change. Now, with this, another change that happened in COVID, where one individual apparently tried to have an exotic animal as food, was able to commute that disease all over the world. Where the current data right now is that there are 500,000 people affected with coronavirus in only the United States. Now, one person's negligence, or I don't know how do you want to explain that, can affect the entire world. This again demonstrates the fact that the world is interconnected. We were not very prepared for this world. This is one thing that I think we can all agree to, that we were not prepared for this level of interconnectedness. We had the WhatsApp, we had the Facebook, but we never realized that while we had those communications, while we had those barriers lifted where the people were connecting together, there were also the other side of this coin, which was essentially the spread of diseases, spread of terrorism, and other sort of things that we have been dealing with. Now, moving on to this third part where I want to discuss exactly what will change and how it will change. And I think there are certain things that we can rightly point out. Uh, One thing is for sure that the and I'll go very crisp on this thing, and I'll be a little bit more blunt. If you look at the data in the last 5 years of democracy index, the democracy in all over the world has kind of continued to slide down. I think, given the corona and the way it has spread, and the result on how the people are now, the government has a bigger role in public affairs, society, and people management. I think we may be seeing a complete collapse of democratic ideals and structures. And if nothing else, I think China's response to COVID kind of demonstrates that democracies all over the world have failed to essentially be able to control corona the way China has, for instance, controlled. Now, there are other reasons for why China was able to control that, their national preparedness. But I think more and more in the times to come, in months and days to come, this argument will be, continue to be floated that democracy may not be the most viable option for the governments around the world to control epidemics like that. Now, my fear is that powers that already are interested to take out democracy may use corona in a way to actually establish more hegemony and more control over the people. And this is something where we have to be very careful to make sure that we are not able to separate that. So I personally see democracy changing completely, and that is going to be one major change from the olden world. The other naturally is the way we interact in the society. I think our society structures, our interactions, our human to human connections, our ability to think about the people, our hygiene, that is also going to be completely shifted. Now, in terms of the global architecture, what does this mean? It means that it's going to have a direct impact on the way we travel, on the way we work, on the way we engage in conferences like this we are driving right now. So that is also going to change. But these are something that are on the very surface and base level. You can talk about democracy, change in society and structure. The real place where I want to come at is how this entire COVID incident will change our allocation of GDP and the funding, because the mindsets are going to change. If our fundings in the post-corona world, I personally see that there will be a lot more interest within the international community and also within Pakistan to reroute a large chunk of the GDP into not just health and education and all, but I personally think there will be a lot more investment into R&D and digitization. These are the two things that I think we're going to focus on. Digitization, because as soon as we are going to a society where things are going to be more excluded, things are going to be more less interpersonal, I think we're going to, the digitization that was going to come in 10 years has already arrived. So this, that process has already sped up. So there's going to be a lot more allocation on that. The second thing I think it's important on this is the R&D. The reason why I talk about R&D, I think, is because Corona has given a, for those in the West, specifically in the Western policy circles, Corona is a best case study that we need to find and fund other avenues to find homeland. For instance, I think the Corona can be taken as testing waters for what is supposed to come in terms of the climate problem. If we have a major climate disaster, which we will have very soon if we don't control things over here, Corona is a very small thing. The way climate is going to impact our society, about our entire way of life, this requires some immediate actions, and I think the government will take in the R&D of how can we go for instance space exploration. That is one area I think that's going to get more beefed up. There will be more and more interest to figure out a way how we can actually escape this planet if certain circumstances develop in the long run. How can we make sure that there is a passageway out? So R&D, I'm expecting to go a lot, even in a country like Pakistan. I think there will be more interest in that. Uh, Last thing, and I want to cut short over here, and I'll leave the floor open for other speakers as well, is the change in mentality and the psyche. I personally think our human relations, our way of thinking, it is likely to change, but that entirely depends on how long the corona will persist. If you're talking about a corona that will go on for a month or two, we might come out of it as normal human beings. If it goes on for, let's say, a year, for instance, in the US and Australia, they're talking about a lockdown for until at least October. Sorry, US and UK, they're talking about a lockdown until at least October. Now, if that happens, the intensity of how things will change and the people's mood and the people's mindset, that is going to directly be impacted by that. So if corona is here to stay for the next 1 month, we'll have a different impact. If it is here to stay for the next 6 months, we might have very different trajectory on how people's minds are going to develop. And there may be it's too early to say any of this sort, but the longer we're able to we are in this corona mess, we might see more and more domestic chaos, civil violence in not just states like Pakistan, but my fear is mostly with the United States right now. And I feel that one of the most important countries to look at in terms of the impact on corona and how the society will be fractured and even the state's cohesion is going to be under the question is the United States. Because the entire politicization, I mean, we've seen deep politicization over corona in Pakistan as well, where there were fake news theories like China gave 100,000 masks and the PTI government kept it with in KPK in Punjab and not gave it to Sindh and Balochistan. These things happen in Pakistan, but more so are happening in the United States, where you have a very highly politicized environment right now, nearing the US elections. You have Bernie Sanders dropping out of the race. You have Donald Trump, with his extremely divisive political rhetoric. You have a very big state like California, which is completely on a different tangent in terms of its handling of the coronavirus. My fear is that if this thing continues to go forward, we may have very serious problems erupting in the US political structure as well. So I'll end it over here and then we can have a further conversation on some of these points. Thanks.
So three quick takes that I've been able to understand from what Dr. Nadeem just talked about. He talked about how the democratic ideals will collapse. That was his take number one. Uh, Secondly, he talked about the allocation of GDP and funding. He said that massive investments will now be routed towards R&D and digitalization. And something that was quite post-dated when we talk about in terms of, in the context of Pakistan, the technological progress. Corona has uh, Corona, the digitalization which would have been ushered gradually in the next 10 years has already come here. And the third thing he talked about is the mentality and psyche of people, how Corona is going to change the mentality and psyche of people. He gave examples of US, he gave examples of Pakistan, how it will end up in more disjuncture between people and more politicization of sorts that will be visible in the coming days. Our next speaker is Mr. Hassan Zaid. He focuses on the intersection of politics, religion, security, and ideas and their influence on state-society relations. He's a visiting lecturer at Ikra University, where he teaches sociology and philosophy. He's also a non-resident research associate at the CSCR. Over to you, Hassan.
Thank you very much, Tara, and thank you, Hussain Nadim, for such edifying introducing remarks. I would like to start with, I have sequenced my points in a very short manner. So I would like to first start with, first we need to, in my opinion, first we need to reinterpret our national security. As Hussain Nadim very well said, that the security architecture is very much different now than it was in the past. Now that our security paradigm is no longer just focused on territorial threats or some threats from non-state actors, but the threat to national security also comes from radicalization, extremism, or pandemics such as these. Even supply chain management, if we have to import our ventilators and masks and all that stuff, and not just to produce within ourselves, that's a matter of national security, not just of social structure. So first, I think we need to integrate our public health to our national security and reinterpret the entire paradigm of security. In that, I would like to focus on legislation and coordination first. As we are seeing right now, there's a clear polarization between the approaches of the central government and the provincial government, especially Sindh province, as Sindh is held by an opposition-led party. Now, what we are seeing is that there is a lack of coordination among them and also a political competition over the narrative of the virus containment and how one province or the other contained it. So we need to have a certain set of protocols, in my opinion, a special set of protocols whenever, such that whenever a circumstances such as pandemic or a massive security crisis appears, these protocols would come into effect and constitution would be suspended. I know it would be a very dangerous thing to say, but I think that in extraordinary circumstances, we need extraordinary measures. And in that respect, I think there must be a set of protocols which allow the central government and the provincial government to better coordinate their actions rather than to polarize their action in context of jurisdiction and authority and all these things. Even in coordination, I heard recently that Murtaza Wahab and the Sania Nishtar, who is handling the central response, they have a very less coordination among this in this SAS program initiative, which they are seeking to generate for the welfare of the people in amidst this virus. So there's a need to integrate public health into national security. Second, there is a much like the dynamic of virus reproduction, there is a dynamic of fear reproduction. Just like the virus multiply as it goes on, fear also multiplies. With fear, I mean that, as Hussain Nadim also said, fake news and also the remarks of some political authorities. When Prime Minister cites research studies which are not substantially validated, this itself is a crisis of confidence among the people. We have seen in Iran that when a deputy health minister is stating that everything is under control and nothing was under control, there is a significant lack of public confidence in the political authority, and it shatters the very fabric of society whenever public cannot trust their political leaders or political authorities. Secondly, when how fear reproduces itself, it reproduces itself as we are seeing in social media, even in electronic media. In electronic media, we are seeing the discourse being led by so-called politicians and analysts, which are not substantially grounded in particular set of studies and only regurgitating the previously held beliefs about the viruses and all that. So first, in my opinion, government need to control the narrative and induct particular scholars or even particular journalists who are very much integrated in the particular set of studies which are relevant to the particular problem, such as a pandemic, rather than those who previously held some beliefs, some hardcore beliefs, which they are very reluctant to change. And second, on the crackdown of information, we are seeing that in a globalized world, even China cannot contain the spread of false information or what they consider false information. But government can at least try to dispel some serious fake news regarding any pandemic or any other massive security crisis. Government needs to play a catch-up game in terms of dispelling these fake news or misinformation regarding the spread of virus or any other logistical issues, which Hussain Nadim also said. Third, we also need a proactive approach in terms of extending consultation. If government is only constrained to bureaucratic advices of the ministries and the government-funded institution, there is a crisis of genuinely gauging the ground realities. When government expand the scope of consultation with publicly funded research institution or privately funded research institution, universities, even civil society organizations or charity organizations, they have a very broad range of data accounting which they can make a substantially grounded policy in terms of the people welfare and other things. I was actually quite worrying about the polio cases amidst this pandemic, as we are seeing that there is a lack of contact, social distancing and physical distancing. I fear that polio, once this virus subsided, or at least its first wave, we might see an increase in polio cases, and that would be very dangerous for our state. Then I believe that we need to have a very, once we integrate our national security with public health, we also need to secure resources or national resources to dedicate to public healthcare institutions or even private healthcare institutions. As we are seeing, even not just us, even UK or United States are not very well prepared for this pandemic. But it's no excuse that we need to absolve our political leaderships. As we have seen that this is not a novel thing. We in the past 19 years or so, we have seen SARS, MERS, swine flu, and then Ebola. So there's a very much a frequency of these epidemics and then some pandemics, and we are likely to see the frequency increasing of these viruses. So we need to first dedicate resources to public healthcare, and also we need to run just like we run drills in military. We also need to run drills in public healthcare institutions to gauge their responses and how would they respond to a particular set of crisis whenever that crisis happens. And fifth point I would like to make is that it comes to the government to actually fund public research institutions and private research institutions, and also set up an autonomous body under Supreme Court whose only main purpose is to research on public healthcare, on not just public healthcare but also on virology. I was very much amazed that we are not seeing very much expertise in terms of the discourse on this coronavirus or any other thing. There's a severe paucity of experts in our society and who can really edify our public regarding the severity of the crisis. So this autonomous institution would have the funding to really generate to really develop a range of scholars as well as virologists and epidemiologists to really counter the next pandemic, which we are very much likely to face in the near term. Then there is a problem of data starvation. In terms of data, there is a significant lack of trust in the public regarding the data, and also there's a starvation of data. I was reading the other day in Dawn, there's 45% informal settlements in Karachi, and that data is not compiled by Pakistan Bureau of Statistics, but it is compiled by Karachi Urban Lab. So when government agencies unable to dedicate an effort to gather data, then our policy response would likely to be very much likely to be in shutters, because data should inform our policy, not just our beliefs in a particular religion or any other spiritual thing. Then I think that there is a need for once the severity of the crisis subsided, we need a mass socialization campaign. Aisha would say about the education, but I would like to point here that we need to inculcate the understanding of public health in our curriculum, and not just in our provincial curriculum, but in the central curriculum. Curriculum development should be a centralized thing, not just a provincial thing, as 18th Amendment legislated. And then lastly, I would like to say that I would like to point one last point. It's the construction of a red team. Red team is an idea that these are contingency teams. They have to plan and imagine threats, all possible threats which a country would likely to face in the near term future. So red teams would better prepare our state to how to respond to this crisis. I was very much amazed when I'm hearing even the military spokesperson or a government spokesperson, even the Prime Minister himself, that this is a novel threat and everyone is encountering in certain different manners. And I think they are simply very much lying. If we are familiarized with the discourse of the scientific community regarding these viruses, there is a substantial discourse that they were really saying that we are likely to face a pandemic such as this in not only corona but certain other also strains of viruses. So there is a strong discourse regarding the likelihood of a pandemic such as this happening, but political leadership didn't respond to it as much as they respond to power plays across Afghanistan or Syria or elsewhere. So there, I think that red team would prepare these states, these our state or any other state, to better respond to this crisis by imagining threats that a particular state could likely to face in the near-term future or in the long-term future. I think that this is these points I've just made regarding my discourse on this particular topic, but I would like to really emphasize that this is not the time for just interpreting our security in a particular territorial term. We really do need to significantly alter our strategic culture and accommodate the aspects which are really belong to the survival of the states. It's not just territorial security anymore, it's also a social security, as Hussain Nadim also said, biopolitics. So there is a biosecurity aspect to the national security paradigm, and we need to integrate it in our national security so that enough or substantial resources can be dedicated to encounter the particular set of problems when they eventually arise. Thank you.
Thank you, Hassan. Quick summation of Hassan's talk. He talked about how we need to integrate public health with national security. And he later in his comments, he talked about we need to inculcate the understanding of public health in our academic curriculum. Data should guide our research. Hassan further said that there is a clear polarization in the understanding about the understanding of virus at government level, both federal and provincial. Which he said that some specifically set protocols need to be set in place. He also talked about how the dynamics of fair reproduction has to be managed. Our next speaker is Miss Aisha Saeed. She's an independent analyst on media and foreign policy of Pakistan. She's also a featured editor at the Academia magazine. Over to you, Aisha.
Thank you so much, Talha. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you for having me. Everyone has talked about a lot of important things, and education is certainly one of them. I would just like to state some facts out. 91.3% of enrolled learners around the world are affected by coronavirus at the moment. So that makes around 188 countries that are, affected by the coronavirus in the school closures. So that means that every country in the world is trying to shift to the online education or the virtual learning, as to call it. So I think in the future that relating to the topic that we're discussing at the moment is that how the future of education would look like. I think most of the countries, especially the developed world, will move on to online education. But I think in Pakistan, obviously, that's going to be an issue. We're still struggling with that. So we'll have to see. As Hussain earlier said, that it's too early to say what will happen after Corona ends. But the thing is that I think the taboo around online learning or the virtual learning or whatever you want to call it will fade away. So more and more people will actually be comfortable in learning online and seeking education online. And I think the universities will work in providing education to a lot of people online. They might even go, provide degrees online. So not just certificates, proper degrees. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that the developing countries are struggling. So they don't have internet in a lot of places. The developing countries, Pakistan is included in those. And what they're trying to do is that they are trying to give education to the people through radio, through television, wherever that is possible. So internet access in the world is still an issue. I think Corona has exposed a lot of flaws in your education system, in your telecommunication companies, in your access to internet, in your inequality overall. Even in the United States, there are kids who can't afford to have laptops or access to internet, so they are out of education at the moment. Obviously, they might come up with something sooner than expected, but there are people who can't have access to education right now. Uh, that's the thing. But the way China has coped with online education is, I think, impressive. They've done a massive job of providing education online. They've made sure that every student had internet access, had access to laptop or some sort of technology, even on their phones, which is obviously lacking in Pakistan. So, in Pakistan, the bright side that I see of this is that the taboo around online learning or virtual learning, which the virtual university is famous for, the taboo might break. So, if somebody wants to learn online and seeks education online, be it a degree or a certificate, people might consider it as an actual, uh, you know, as an actual degree or certificate, not just, you don't have to be physically present in the university anymore. Hussain actually wrote an article that can universities survive the digitization or the digital age. I think, when he talks about digitization of content, of, the knowledge that should be put up on the web, I think that's going to happen pretty soon. Like he pointed that, digitization is already here. So the universities might still exist, or the schools might still exist, but we'll have to develop a curriculum or some sort of mechanism that starts from a very basic level. So you have like preschool education. Preschoolers right now are pretty much free. They don't have a lot of homework to do. That's, I think, happening everywhere. So, and secondly, I think most important thing is the concept of homeschooling. I think it's going to be brought back. More and more people would like their children to be homeschooled, whether they take help from the online system or books or whatever. But I think the taboo around homeschooling and the pressure that a lot of people have to send their kids to school will fade away. So it's too early to say, but I think education sector, as far as education is concerned, I think they'll have to cope with not just providing education, but providing it through technology and providing technology along with it. So if schools consider providing online education to their students, they would have to work out a plan on if somebody has a laptop or not, if somebody has a phone or not, if somebody has internet access or not. And if they do, how are they going to learn about it? How are they, going to stay active students while being online? These are the things the education sector is facing. I think around the world it's happening that the students, some want, they want to go back to school, which is perfectly fine, I think. But Corona has exposed a lot of flaws in every education system, be it in the United States, be it in China, be it in the developing countries, everywhere. As far as Pakistan is concerned, it's a case scenario that Hussein like points out again. Sorry that I keep on pointing you out, but the thing is that I think now we have two problems in Pakistan. One is that we don't have internet access in a lot of places, yet alone mobile phone networks. And two is that the universities were not prepared for it. So a lot of universities were able to provide online education, online classes, and all of that stuff. But a lot of universities are still struggling with it. Punjab University, they have said that the classes online are mandatory, but a lot of students don't have access to internet. That's one problem. So Pakistan, the other problem Pakistan faces is that we already had a lot of children who were out of school. So the government will have to think that now how are we going to accommodate children who are already out of school to make sure that they at least study at home. So you have like multiple problems emerging out of all this corona scenario. How are you going to deal with it? Obviously, the government is trying. HEC is on it. The higher education commissions of all 12 provinces are on it. Uh, but I think we did not learn from the process that we were closing schools during smoke days. I mean, we had no alternative. We did not fix the environment. We did not work on fixing the environment in the long term. So, that could have been a test drive for us, that we were closing down schools, but what were the alternatives that you were providing? We did not learn from that. So now, the government is juggling here and there, trying to, suspend online classes. There are organizations trying to suspend online classes, uh, working for those, but THC is trying to give, platform to everyone. So, but still, I don't think the situation will in the education sector will improve anytime soon. That's all.
Um, Aisha Saeed has rightly pointed out that this pandemic has exposed the vulnerabilities in our education system. A very interesting observation. She said that the online education, although we don't think about it, but it is right. Online education has many taboos attached to it here in our society. Um, she said that the taboo of virtual learning will definitely erode in the future. It will be a positive outcome. Um, we already have a model in the form of virtual university. They have this fully functional LMS, learning management system, through which the students can access their classes online, and they get assessed accordingly. Um, very important observation. She said that in Pakistan, there are currently two major issues that we are facing with regards to our education system, and especially in the time of Corona. She said the access to internet connectivity is issue number one. And then secondly, she said that the unpreparedness of universities, that is the second issue. Thank you, Aisha. We are now moving to our fourth speaker of the session today. Uh, our fourth speaker is Mr. Hamraz Ahmed. He is a research assistant. He's a research assistant as well as the assistant editor at the Center for Strategic and Contemporary Research. He specializes in international governance and development related issues. Over to you, Hamraz.
Uh, Thank you very much, sir. And I'm really humbled by the opportunity. I hope everyone can listen to my voice, right? It is clear.
Apparently, your internet connectivity is faulty. Can you check at your end?
Uh, is it good now?
You speak, we'll hear you. You start speaking, we'll hear you. We'll update you accordingly.
All right. Well, as a student of international relations, and as the one obliged to deliberate on the governance aspects of the orders coming out of this coronavirus pandemic, I shall try to focus on the changes that this pandemic is likely to make to the existing structures of governance and globalization. Now, there have been many reflections lately on how this pandemic is to change globalization. Some experts are even raising questions, as ambitious as is this the end of globalization? But however, these are the things that time will truly reveal to us. But we can really see that the ingredients and the things that make globalization, especially what it is, do seem to be highly problematized right now. For one, we have this severe breakdown of global critical supply chains, and an unprecedented hoarding of goods is taking place at the international level. And then there are travel bans, complete suspensions of flight operations. These things are pushing airline companies into great deficits. And this massive blow will make it very tough for the air travel industry to recover. To even when the emergency is over, which according to experts and many governments as well around the world is going to stay for a while, ranging from a few months or to 2 years. Even when the emergency is gone, the restrictions are going to stay in place, and a widespread social distrust, in international travel will be further denting international mobility. And then there is a sudden expansion in the state's role, the kind that has probably uh, not been seen in a little less than a generation's lifetime. So therefore, whatever held together the globalization that we knew is really likely to fall loose by great margins. And shorter supply chains and the likely post-corona regionalisms will further sever the global, what exactly we call it. And so there are less reasons to believe that globalization in its up till now prevailing form is going to survive. Now, it is not like that the international business will vanish or dwindle away, because it has been here for long time. From spice trade to European trading companies and colonialism, people have been trading across vast distances for centuries, and it is not a recent phenomenon. What we try to imply by, or conceive of the word globalization, is the massive and explosive exchange of capitals and cultures across the globe. And this is what experts believe is going to be seriously challenged. And now that what changes, these systemic shifts are making to the methods of organization and implementation of state, the circumstances are so drastic and intense that they are making very concrete, economically indifferent neoliberal state formations to change. And this is something which is already back in a struggling phase for about last 12 13 years, since the financial meltdown of 2008. This outbreak might lead the states to take decisive positions now as to what rules should be applied now, and what rules should they really assume in global economic, political, health, and environmental governance. And the conditions are most likely to be very problematic. And then this massive social distancing, which is severely reducing, consumer spending, which resultantly reduce workers' wages and cause industrial shutdowns and mass unemployment. This, where on one hand will reduce the existing revenues in the form of decreased sales taxes and income taxes. On the other hand, it will make more people eligible for Medicaid, social securities, and all sorts of state-led welfare. And this is necessitating a greater state's role in everything, you can say. Um, Many cuts in state spendings and reductions in developmental and non-developmental expenditure will have to take place. And the focus is likely to shift to other sectors, like health sector. And this will put severe strains on the state budgets, and this will make things more problematic for the policies to run the governance system they have been running up till now. And this will make the states to shift their focus and to shift their spending towards the sectors which are made important by the pandemic now. And this will definitely make investors further to opt for the sectors which have more governmental cushions, and such as health, as I have said earlier. And this will very likely invoke new alternative regional supply chains, the shorter supply chains, which can be highly occupied by health industry. And it can really give way to regionalisms, and um, global economy, you can say, can be really run along state lines in the coming years. And with all this, with the greater state role in other things, we can see a very greater legitimacy and authority being ascribed to the states in terms of regulating or running public spaces, and in terms of surveillance. so much legitimacy has been gained by the state recently during this pandemic that states now can they have full legitimacy to declare public spaces unhealthy, or public organizing or agitations or protest or whatever. They can declare every such thing a menace to the public good, to the collective good, and they can really rule the people out of these places. However, people are innovating in the face of this crisis, and they are exploring alternative avenues and alternative ways to keep practicing community and to keep organizing. Like there's been a very famous protest lately in Spain. The Spanish citizens, as they could not go out on the public spaces, to the public spaces to carry out that protest, but during their king's speech, they settled with banging pots and pans within their homes, and they did not listen to the speech, and they made a statement that we do not listen to your speech, and this went on. And likewise, many other things have certainly shifted to the cyberspace, like concerts, universities, even most of the official work nowadays is being done on the via cyber channels. So this gives state much room and much capability to personalize and to authorize the public spaces, and then the surveillance, mm, the legitimacy and the expansion of the state-wide surveillance has never been greater, because now as the people working at the center might have given a read to my recent web analysis, in which I'm trying to apprise of the the ethical debates that used to sprout in the past, when like the US launched in the late 80s the Human Genome Project, and under that project New York Police Department ran genetic profiling of the New York citizens of the New York, and this was primarily done to provide the authorities with prior knowledge and prior cognizance of potential troublemakers in the city. Uh, the concept of genetic the criminal gene had come into the discourse, and this sparked a severe ethical debate, and eventually the Human Genome Project had to be shut down. But now, as these are so desperate times, so extraordinary times, that many things which were not possible in the past, in the recent past as well, are now quite possible, and the taboos of the past and the limits, the boundaries of the past are incrementally being transcended. So these unprecedented expansions in the surveillance infrastructures, in states' authority over the public space, in greater state role in allocating the incentives, and even and also authority to de-incentivize much of the sectors. We can say that this great state role and such weak weak and international trade and supply chains are really eroding the fabric of globalization, the fabric in the way it existed, and this is giving way to a more nationalized and more governmentalized channels of trade and supply chains, and coupled with all these things, like um uh, Dr. Hussain said that many ideals of democracy are also being challenged, and um, many constructs like freedom and constitutionalities are also seen suspended nowadays, and it gives a lot of room to the xenophobic and protectionist leadership around the world to implement their policies. Like the BJP government has just accelerated its mission of demographic change in Jammu and Kashmir, and likewise the something which is called as the first Corona dictatorship by Noah Harari. The Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared the rule by decree in Israel, and authoritarianisms, xenophobia, and greater and coercive state role are what can be really seen coming ahead. And what we should expect, in my view, is it's not that it will not be appropriate to say that globalization is ending or is going to die down, but this will be a globalization with alternative supply chains of with ample health securitization and alternative international security discourses. And it will be most likely be a globalization with a more national phase, nationalized channels of powered by nationalized channels of trade and international development, as I said. Now, in the end, I think that all this really calls for us to look for and develop more interdisciplinary approaches to build response mechanisms to such pandemics or crisis of such scope, because uh, there has already been many pandemics in the last 20 years. So some of them were named by panelists also, and this really can you all hear me? It says the connection is unstable, right? Okay. So this really calls for the academia to engage as much civil society stakeholders and experts from different fields, like for example, public policy experts for collaborating with sociology experts and international experts or international development experts collaborating with other individuals and professionals from the science. And we really need such interdisciplinary approaches to tread forward in this time of uh, great crisis. And while this crisis poses great fears and threats to our species, on the other hand, it also gives opportunities and opens the doors for rethinking of many systems of domination and the many things that are not fixed in the prevailing world. It also opens windows to many new avenues to rethink many things and to rethink our global obsession with growth and our global obsession with development and the enthusiastic developmentalisms which actually run the state in 21st century. So this is what we all have to think about, and while there there lies great fear, there lies hope as well. That I think that would be all from my side. I thank you all for listening so patiently.
Thank you, Hamraz. Before we start off with question and answer sessions, I would like to sum up some of the comments that Hamraz has made. Um, in conclusion, he said that we'll be seeing the emergence of globalization with a more nationalized flavor. Globalization with alternative supply chains, shorter supply chains. That was his contention. He also talked about how we need to opt for an interdisciplinary approach, and there is always hope. There is always hope. Apart from that, he said that the state systems are under the neoliberal institutions are under severe strain. The conditions are not conducive for them, as states are exerting greater control. He also said that more focus will be appropriated to sectors that have more focus will be appropriated to certain sectors, not all sectors, that 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 are now being considered important in the post that are now being considered important, and that he uh, that somehow applies for the sectors that are resilient as well. That is all from Hamraz's side. We have some question and answers to deal with, starting from one directed at Aisha Saeed by Hassan Zahir. Aisha Hassan has asked, what are your recommendations to the HEC and universities, mostly private universities, on how to improve their digital learning platforms? Also, should it be a consultative approach with faculty and students, or it should be the bureaucratic approach of the administration? What do you say?
Well, the HEC has directed every university to set up an online, account for learning and stuff. But the thing is that the universities need to have a single curriculum that they can put online and then they can transfer it through recordings and all that stuff. So I gave a recommendation that the universities can work individually with the telecommunication companies, and then they can, not only provide the curriculum to those particular telecommunication companies, private or government, doesn't matter. But they can, and then the companies, obviously, if they have access to internet, they can provide it further to the students. So, one thing that can be done is that the universities collaborate directly with the telecommunication companies. Uh, but obviously, the HSC would have to be involved, because then, someone has to supervise it. The second thing the HSC can do is that make sure that every university, they can make a clause that if you have to retain the status of university, you have to provide the option of online learning to students, regardless of the fact that we face a corona-like situation in the future or not. So that means if a student is unable to attend classes, if they mark their attendance online for whatever reason, that should be made a practice and a norm for everyday use as well. So that way, the universities will have a continuous up and running, online education platform. Uh, that's one way the universities can work. The second thing is that, the bureaucratic approach doesn't work as smoothly in Pakistan as it should. But the HSC can, enforce a few course of actions for the future. But the thing is that the telecommunication companies might have some reservations that, they have some policies regarding their own companies and stuff, that if they're able to provide access to, internet to the further areas of Pakistan or not. So these are things that need to be sorted. But I think otherwise, if the HEC, if the universities sit together and the telecommunication companies sit together, all three can come up with, solutions to how to handle online or digital learning platforms. I think that's about it.
Okay, thank you, Aisha. Next question I have is for Hassan. This question has been raised by Ali Hadi, one of our research associates at the center. Hassan, how do you compare and contrast the contours of social networking in the pre-COVID world to social distancing in post-COVID world, especially from the lens of sociological perspective?
Actually, I think that the term itself, social distancing, is a very misleading term, because we are not socially distance in terms of communication and our digitalization of communication. So we are not socially distanced, but we are physically distanced. So the term itself has very mistaken connotations. So we need, I think that WHO also redefined the term. I guess I was reading the other day. So there, on the first aspect of the question, I don't think there is a particular divide in terms of the patterns of pre or post, pre or during Corona discourse, because the same fear or the same fake news or infodemic that we were witnessing or experiencing in the discourses pre-corona, we are witnessing and experiencing them right now. So I don't think there is a much distinction between the discourses in terms of pre or during corona circumstances. But the term, I have a very strong reservation regarding the term. That shouldn't be the social distancing, it should be a physical distancing.
Thank you, Hassan. We have another question for Aisha. This question has been raised by Fahad Nabil, our research coordinator at the center. Aisha, don't you think that more focus towards online education will reinforce the educational divide which we already have in terms of access to quality education?
Can you repeat the question?
More focus towards online education, will it reinforce the educational divide that we already have in terms of quality education?
Of course, I think that's one of the dilemmas that we're about to face. That on one level, we were trying to enforce a national curriculum in all schools, including madrasas, but at the same time, there are schools and universities that are trying to enforce their own curriculum. That includes mostly the private schools. So yes, the gap will be there. So now the government has another challenge, which I just thought of, is that they were trying to ensure a national curriculum. But how will you ensure a national curriculum when you're trying to give education to students sitting at home? So I think that's one of the things. But the national curriculum, if it is enforced, I think will ease the access of online learning, because if you set up let's say a whole platform where students from all the universities or schools per se can come up and have a study together, so they won't have to differentiate between if somebody is a private student or goes to a government school, so they can all sit and study together. But that's the dilemma that the government needs to think about, that how are they going to enforce a national curriculum when you have such a huge divide and when you have issues like corona and all these coming up every now and then. So yes, the gap is exposed, but what are you going to do about that gap? So it's up to the government to think about how they can manage the gap.
Okay. The next question that has been directed towards us is from Rida Anwar. She is our research assistant at the center. That this question is, she wants Hassan, Zahir, and Hamraz to give an answer on this one, give their perspective on this one. As Corona has incentivized and further legitimized the governments to carry on with mass surveillance, can we expect the re-emergence of social issues like racism and Islamophobia, as framing a specific ethnicity would be easier than it was in the past? But perhaps Hassan, Hamraz can start off with this one and followed by Hassan. Over to you,
Yes,
Hamraz.
thank you. Yes, there is a very clear possibility for the re-emergence of racism and xenophobia of all sorts, because the the current the discourses actually in the 21st century comparative political discourses, what is getting currency, winning currency over and over is the protectionist and xenophobic and anti-immigrant and anti-international trade lobby or side of the polities. So that's what we have seen lately coming into power, and all those leaders and all those establishments have gained a much greater legitimacy right now than they ever had in the history in the post World War II history, of course. It will be, yes, much easier for framing. It is much easier to frame ethnicities, and it will be much cushier to declare social groups as bad or menace to the public or collective or greater good. So there are very clear signs of rising xenophobia in the coming post-corona world. I agree with that.
Hassan, you can give your perspective now.
I concur with Hamraz that actually I have a reservation regarding the word re-emergence. We are when we say re-emergence, we are basing it that the racism or xenophobia or Islamophobia or any phobia, it subsided in the past. It never did. The word that the present circumstances, this coronavirus would reinforce those notions, that yes, it will definitely reinforce these notions. And as we are really seeing that Tablighi Jamaat Even in India, they are really shifting the narrative on them that they spread this all coronavirus in India. So we will likely to see the reinforcement of these non-democratic or non-liberal ideas into the discourses of politicians, but the term re-emergence is very misinterpreting the situation. Re-emergence. It is not re-emerging. It is continuingly emerging.
Okay. We have one question from Sajad Ahmed for Aisha Saeed. He has asked about how students of FADA have no internet availability, so how can they continue their online education?
Yes, I read that question, and that's the issue that we were discussing. That places with access to no internet education, obviously, the government needs to think of plans to get education there and then, like immediately. So one way can be radio, the other way can be television. But I don't think all the universities have such programs. So this is where I was pointing that universities can, have a single curriculum. The teachers can decide on a particular curriculum or for a particular subject, and they can, give it to television or give it to radio. So that's a very temporary solution that we're thinking about or discussing at the moment. Because in case of Ebola in the African countries, that's what they did where they had no internet access. They provided lessons through radio and telecommunication. Radio and television. So I think that's what the government needs to do, and I think people from FATA are, uh, they're not up against online classes anyway, because you see a lot of trends of suspend online classes and all of that going on. But I think they need to understand that, one, the government has limitations. Two, the government can also lift those limitations. So if they push hard enough, I think the government should listen, or they can do something about it.
The final question of today's session has been directed towards Hussain Zaid. Unfortunately, we don't have Dr. Hussain Nadim with us, so we won't be taking the questions that have been directed towards him. This question has been raised by one of your co-panelists, Hamraz. Hussain Zahir has posed this query that how you view globalization from Western centric perspective. Do you think China is not trying to challenge globalization, but West dominated globalization? And does Chinese approach of strong nationalist states leading globalization has more merit than liberal democratic state-led globalization? Uh, you have to unmute your mic, Hamraz.
I forgot to. I apologize.
No problem.
Okay. Yes, I was saying, of course, globalization in its very essence is eventually the naturalization of the Enlightenment project and the Westphalian political formations around the world. So, as far as because globalization there are so many however different diverse perspectives on globalization, but the globalization I'm talking in the naturalized terms, and with the naturalized and settled connotations of the word. It is only the expansion of the Western political systems and Western culture and Western security discourses and all the things. So as far as China is concerned, I think it is more of Chinese personalization of the globalization than Chinese challenge to globalization, because as they have been going on after Deng after the liberalization of Chinese economy, the way they have personalized the global trade routes through their checkbook diplomacy and and their development-led security thinking. This is a great challenge, but more than a challenge, it is a personalization attempt at globalization from China. And as far as the nationalist states leading globalization is concerned, right? So as Dr. Hussain also mentioned in his talk, that the Western democracy, liberal democracy, and the liberal ideals, and you also hinted on that, are constantly losing currency, and the most viable system of governance and system of political organization that has come across in this pandemic is the Chinese meritocracy, vertical meritocracy, which has immense capabilities to move massive or mobilize massive resources and a very organized working body under it. It has definitely gotten a much more merit than the liberal democratic states or democratic political systems in the current scenario. That's what I.
Okay. Uh, Thank you all. And panelists. Very importantly, focus. We need to think this. We have it for the next. Okay, I'm joining from here. I believe you won't be able to see my face, but this is the backup thing that I had done. So, but a number of researchers today think that it's actually humanity's destruction of biodiversity that has created the conditions for new viruses and diseases such as COVID-19, with profound health and economic impacts in rich and poor countries alike. Some highlights from the current session that we had. How our panelists view the post-COVID situation. We have 7 observations, and I'll be sharing those observations one by one, and then we will conclude this discussion. Observation number 1 is that COVID-19 will lead to the collapse of the democratic ideals. Observation number 2 is we'll be seeing more investment in R&D and digitalization. Observation number 3, aptly pointed out by Hussain Nadim, is that we need to proactively manage the dynamics of fair production. It will become imperative in the long run. Observation number 4 is that empiricism or data will gain a central role in decision making. That was unfortunately we had this vacuum, but now from now onwards, empiricism will gain a central role in decision making. Observation number 5 from Aisha Saeed is that education systems in Pakistan will have to readjust themselves and opt for online learning, and the taboos associated with online learning will have to be overcome by the society. Observation number 6 by Hamraz is that we will be seeing the emergence of globalization with a national outlook. And observation number 7 is the supply chains will get shorter, and the supply chains will get narrowed down. That is all from my side. We'll be concluding the discussion now. It was really nice having you on board, and thank you for taking out time for this webinar today.
Thank you very much.